Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to the chilling world of Mr. Haunt. Please subscribe. It's our biggest motivation to keep bringing you spine-tingling stories. Let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, let's get into the stories. I was 13 when my grandfather told me the story that would later save my life. At the time, I thought he was just being old and cryptic, like most Navajo elders. We were sitting outside his house on the reservation, long after the summer. Sun had set behind the sandstone cliffs. I remember the way his voice dropped when he spoke of the ones who walk like men but are not men. I listened, half interested, more focused on the owl hooting from the canyon. I didn't believe a damn word of it. It took me 20 years to realize. He wasn't telling me a story. He was warning me. My name is Eric Yazzie. I'm a wildlife biologist. And in 2022, I took a job with a private conservation company surveying a stretch of protected land bordering tribal land in New Mexico. It was isolated country, nothing for miles but juniper, sand, and sky. The job seems simple. Map animal migration patterns, monitor a few species, and make sure no unauthorized development was happening on the edges of the reservation. That land, though it breathes, and not in a poetic way, I mean you feel it. The silence out there is its own kind of sound, like the dirt is listening. I set up camp 3 miles into the survey zone, near a dry arroyo that hadn't seen water in years. I was alone, except for a UTV, my drone gear, and a satellite radio. I worked from dawn till dusk, recording movement patterns and tracking deer trails. The first few days were fine, quiet, too quiet. By the 4th night, something changed. It started with the coyotes. Their howls came in at dusk, normal at first. Then they stopped, not gradually, just gone, as if someone had cut the sound off mid-yip. I stepped outside my tent and looked around. The moon was high and full, casting silver light over the red rock and sparse brush. Then I saw them, eyes low to the ground, reflected light, greenish, blinking. Coyote, I told myself, probably curious about my food. But then they stood up, not walked forward, not leaped, stood up. I froze. There were 2 figures, thin, tall, unnaturally tall. Their proportions were wrong, limbs too long, heads slightly tilted, like they were studying me. One of them began to mimic a coyote howl, but it was off, too high-pitched. It ended in a choking, human cough. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward them, and that's when one of them ran, on all 4s, low to the ground like a spider skittering across rock. The other just stood there, head cocked like it was mocking me. Then it whispered something. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them, like a sickness under my skin. I fired a warning shot into the air. Nothing. I packed up my essentials and fled that night, speeding back to the ranger station, 15 miles away. I didn't explain what I saw, just said there were large predators on the trail. They sent someone to check the next day. The only thing they found, my tent slashed 2 ribbons, the inside smeared with red dust. Not blood, dust, thick, powdery, and shaped, almost like footprints. When I told my grandfather about it later that year, he just nodded. They like to wear the skin of animals, he said, staring past me. But now they want to wear ours. I left that job, and I never went back. But sometimes, when the wind's just right and the desert is still, I hear them, just outside the edge of dreams, calling in voices that are almost human, and I pray they never learn my name. It was supposed to be a healing trip. After the divorce, I didn't know what else to do but drive. I ended up in Arizona without planning it, like some invisible current pulled me there. I grew up in Flagstaff but hadn't set foot back near Navajo Nation in nearly 2 decades. My mother's side of the family lived on the reservation, but we'd fallen out of touch years ago. Still, some part of me remembered the smell of the high desert after a rain, the sound of wind rushing through slot canyons, the way the stars looked when you got far enough away from the noise. So I rented a cabin just outside Window Rock, secluded, quiet. Just what I thought I needed to clear my head. The place was rustic, bare wood floors, no Wi-Fi, and a single, old radio with a fuzzy signal. At night, the wind would creak through the beams, and coyotes cried in the distance. The first 2 nights were uneventful, peaceful, even. I cooked simple meals on the stove and watched the stars while drinking cheap whiskey from a mug. But then came night 3, around 2 a.m. I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside, slow, deliberate. I hadn't seen another person in a 2-mile radius all day. Thinking it was just an animal, I ignored it at first, until something tapped the window. Tap, tap, tap. Not scratching, not the skitter of claws, knuckles, like someone gently trying to get my attention. I sat up, heart thudding. The window near my bed didn't have curtains. That had never bothered me before. I turned slowly to look. There was someone standing just outside the glass. And by someone, I mean, it looked human, but I knew in my bones it wasn't. Its skin was stretched too tight over its frame. Hair was patchy, matted with what looked like dirt or blood. Its eyes caught the starlight and gleamed yellow, like a predator's. It didn't move, just stood there, tapping its knuckles against the glass, slowly, again and again. Tap, 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 tap. I couldn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared, praying it wouldn't try the door. Then it smiled, a wide, unnatural smile that went too far up the cheeks, and it spoke, in my voice. Let me in. It's cold. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the old hunting knife from the kitchen drawer. I never turned the lights on. I didn't want it to know exactly where I was. I crawled to the far end of the cabin, heart hammering like it might explode out of my chest. The tapping stopped, then came scratching. Not at the window, at the roof. I couldn't make sense of it. This thing, whatever it was, had gotten up there. I didn't hear climbing. It was just there. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Then footsteps again, heavy, pacing back and forth overhead. I sat with my back to the wall, clutching the knife, waiting for it to break through the ceiling, or smash the window, and then it was morning. No sound, no movement, just the rising sun pouring through the windows, and the birds chirping like none of it had happened. I opened the front door slowly, heart still thudding. No footprints, no claw marks, just a single handprint on the glass. It was mine. I packed up and left that same hour. Drove until I saw people again. Told myself it was a dream, a hallucination. The stress, the isolation. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear tapping at my window. Tap, 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 and a voice that sounds like mine. I didn't believe in any of it. Not ghosts, not monsters, not folklore. I was the skeptic of our group, always rolling my eyes when someone brought up creepy local legends. That changed the summer. I took a camping trip with 3 friends in northern New Mexico, not far from the Chuska Mountains. The plan was simple: disconnect for a few days, hike, fish, and tell dumb stories by the fire. We were all in our late 20s, still hanging on to the illusion that adulthood didn't mean giving up. Adventure. The first 2 days were perfect. We pitched our tents near an old arroyo that cut through the red earth like a scar. During the day, we explored. At night, we drank beer by the fire and talked about everything and nothing. On the third night, though, things turned. That evening, we saw a coyote standing just beyond the ring of firelight. Its eyes reflected the flames, and it didn't move, even when we threw a rock at it to scare it off. It just watched. Creepy little bastard, I remember saying, laughing nervously, but something about it made us all uneasy. It finally slunk off into the darkness after a few long minutes. Later, after everyone had passed out, I woke up needing to pee. I stepped out of my tent and walked a short distance from camp, flashlight in hand. That's when I saw it again. The same coyote, sitting silently on the ridge above us, still watching. I pointed the light at it. It didn't flinch, and then it spoke. Not a growl, not a howl. Words, it said. "You left the circle." I froze. The voice was dry, cracked, almost whispery, but unmistakably human. I thought I was losing my mind. I turned and ran back to the tent, yelling to wake the others. Of course, they didn't believe me at first. They checked for footprints, laughed it off as a dream or too much beer. But we decided to pack up early the next morning anyway. Except when we tried to leave, we couldn't find the trail. I know that sounds dumb. We had GPS, maps, even marked trees like amateur Boy Scouts, but none of it made sense anymore. The arroyo twisted in ways it hadn't before. Familiar landmarks vanished. It was like the land had shifted while we slept, and then we saw them. Not just one coyote, but dozens, standing on the ridges around us, watching. Every time we turned, another one was there, closer than before. One of them limped forward. Its front leg hung strangely, like it had been broken and never healed. It stopped just a few yards from me, stared into my eyes, and said, in my brother's voice, "You shouldn't have come here." That's when we started running. I don't even remember how we got out. The next thing I knew, we were stumbling onto a dirt road and flagging down a rancher in a pickup. We never went back to get our gear, never talked about it again after that day, but something followed me. I know it, because sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear a voice outside my window that doesn't belong to anyone. I know, and it always says the same thing. You left the circle. Entry from my uncle's old field journal, dated September 15th, 1997, transcribed from a weathered leather-bound book found in his cabin after he vanished. I shouldn't be writing this, not because I'm afraid someone will read it, but because writing it makes it real, makes it harder to pretend it didn't happen. You want to know why I don't go hunting anymore? Why I sold my truck, boarded up the old place, and drink like I'm trying to forget my name. Then read on. But don't say I didn't warn you. It started with a scream. I was deep in the mountains, near the Arizona-New Mexico border, scouting for elk signs. I'd gone off, trail into a thick ravine choked with sage and crumbling red rock. It was late, too late, honestly, and I knew I should have turned back. But then I heard it. A scream. Not human, not animal, a mix of both, stretched and strangled into something unnatural. Like someone being torn in half cried it echoed through the gorge. Then came the silence, and then the footsteps. Coming fast, I pressed myself against the side of the ravine, holding my breath. Whatever was running through that narrow gulch was big, heavy, but not lumbering. It moved like it knew the land, like it had walked it forever. I didn't see it clearly, not then, just a flash. Long limbs, gray skin, and a face that didn't look finished. Like someone had started sculpting a person and stopped halfway. I stayed there all night, crouched in the cold dirt. Didn't dare move. Come dawn, I ran. I hiked until my feet bled. Found my way back to the cabin, locked the doors, and didn't leave for 3 days. I told myself it was a hallucination. Sleep deprivation. Just a predator I didn't recognize. But then, it followed me. First, it was tracks, barefoot prints in the dust behind my cabin. Then came the knocks. Not on the door, on the walls, high, up, where no person could reach without a ladder. Every night, the knocking moved closer to the windows, then the whispering. Started always the same phrase. You walked where you shouldn't. I tried to burn sage, tried to pray. I even called an old medicine woman my grandfather knew, begging for advice. She told me to leave, now. Said I'd walked into sacred land, a place not meant for people. That something old had seen me. Something angry. I packed to leave that night. Didn't even take my guns or my money. Just threw what I could into a duffel and drove until the tank ran dry. But I don't think I ever really escaped. Sometimes I wake up and smell the sagebrush again. Hear the rocks shifting beneath something's weight. And once, just once, I saw its reflection in my bathroom mirror. Just behind me. Not moving. Just smiling. The journal ends there. My uncle was reported missing a week later. They found his truck, abandoned in the desert. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Just the smell of sage and something like rotting meat in the air. I still have the journal, and sometimes, when I leave it open, the pages turn on their own. Always to that same entry. It was supposed to be the scenic route, just me and my buddy Luis, on a cross-country drive from Denver to Phoenix. Google Maps suggested a weird little detour, a lesser-known road called Navajo Route 13 that cut straight through reservation land. Shaved off an hour, it claimed. We were 2 hours in, middle of nowhere. No signal, no towns, just desert, canyons, and a lot of sky. The sun dipped low, casting orange shadows that made the rocks look alive. That's when we saw the man. He stood at the edge of the road, facing away from us. Naked, but not fully human. Tall, too tall, with elongated arms that hung past his knees. His back was mottled with strange scars. For a second, I thought it was a deer carcass standing on 2 legs. Luis slowed the car. I screamed at him to keep going. But by then, the thing had turned around. It had no face. Just a smooth, stretched surface where eyes and a mouth should be. But we felt it looking at us, like its gaze was crawling under our skin. We drove fast. I begged him not to stop again, no matter what we saw. Then the music started. Old country music crackled from the car radio, which would be fine, except we hadn't had reception for over 100 miles. The dashboard lights flickered. My phone lit up with random messages. Get out. Too late. Your food. Luis tried to laugh it off. Said it was a prank. App. I didn't think so. Not when the music stopped, and a voice came through. My voice. You left me there, it whispered. We hadn't left anyone, at least. Not that we remembered. The desert looked different now. Every rock formation seemed twisted into something, watching. Shapes moved just out of view. Tall figures that darted behind boulders, mimicking our faces. Ours, but wrong. Like melted wax masks of ourselves. Luis gripped the wheel with white knuckles. There's something in the back seat, he whispered. I turned, slow and terrified. Nothing was there. But the car felt heavier, like it carried more than us. And then Luis started muttering in Navajo. His grandmother was from the Dine people. He used to say he barely remembered the language, but now he was reciting something rhythmic, low, like a protection chant. That's when the figure appeared again, standing in the road, blocking our path. Luis didn't swerve. He drove through it. The creature exploded into ash and bone fragments against the windshield, but there was no sound, no blood, just silence and blackness, then light. We blinked, and we were suddenly at the edge of a Chevron station. Full daylight. Our car clean, full tank. No sign of damage. No log of that road on the GPS. Luis looked at me and said, "We don't talk about this, ever. But I can't stop thinking about it. About the thing in the road. About why it took my voice. About what it meant when it said you left me there. The worst part. Sometimes I see myself walking down my street at night, but I'm already inside, watching from the window." It was my first winter alone in the mountains of northern Arizona, after my dad passed. He left me the cabin, his sanctuary as he called it. It sat on a lonely ridge near the edge of the reservation land, surrounded by pine trees and quiet snow. I thought some isolation would be good. I needed the space. It was peaceful the first few days. Crisp air, the crackle of the fireplace, the distant calls of coyotes. But around the fifth night, something changed. It started with the footsteps on the roof. They weren't heavy, light, quick, too quick, like a deer or something with hooves. But the rhythm was wrong. They'd stop directly above my bed and stay there for hours. I'd lie frozen, barely breathing, waiting for them to move. Then they'd begin pacing, back and forth, across the entire roof, but never stepping off. I checked the snow in the morning. No tracks. On the seventh night, it started scratching, not at the windows. From the roof, fingernails on metal. Slow, deliberate strokes, like it wanted me to know it was there. I grabbed my dad's rifle, stormed outside in my boots and bathrobe. Heart pounding, nothing. But I did notice something new. The chimes my dad had hung from the porch were gone. Every last one. Just the strings left swaying in the wind. I found them the next day, buried under the porch, in a neat little pile, like they'd been placed there. That night, I barricaded the door and didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., the scratching started again. Then I heard my father's voice. "Son," it whispered, "let me in." I forgot my keys. The voice came from the chimney. My dad had been dead for 4 months. I didn't move, didn't speak, but the voice kept talking, softer, slower, more distorted. "Cold out here. So cold. Let me in." Then the fire went out. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up at dawn, with the rifle still in my lap. The cabin was freezing. I got up to light the fire again, and saw something carved into the inside of the chimney wall. Symbol? Not English, not Navajo, just wrong. I called an elder from the nearby community. He came the next day, silent as I told the story. Then he walked into the cabin, looked around, sniffed the air, and said only this: "It knows you're alone." He gave me a pouch of herbs, told me to burn it every night, and not to speak to any voice I heard from above. It's been 2 weeks. The scratching hasn't stopped. The voice still calls itself my father. Sometimes it cries, sometimes it laughs. And last night, I heard my own voice whispering back. I was driving through the Navajo Nation late one night, heading to Flagstaff from Santa Fe. I had taken the long way, Highway 264, because I wanted to avoid the main interstates and soak in the quiet desert landscape. Just me, a thermos of coffee, and the glow of the dashboard under a moonless sky. It was just after 2 a.m. when I saw it at first. I thought it was a dog. It darted into the road about 300 feet ahead, crossed in one leap, then vanished into the brush. I tapped the brakes and squinted. I hadn't passed another car in nearly an hour, and I felt the strange weight of isolation press in all around me. I kept driving, but something felt wrong. 5 minutes later, I saw it again. Only this time, it didn't cross the road, it ran alongside me. I was going 50, then 60. It kept pace. I glanced out the window, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't a dog. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, with long, angular limbs. Its back was hunched, and its skin was the color of ash. But the worst part was the face. It looked stretched, like a human mask pulled too tight over the wrong kind of skull. The eyes were empty, not just dark, empty, like looking into a well that had no bottom. I floored the gas. My tires kicked dust behind me, and the car rattled on the uneven asphalt. It disappeared from the corner of my vision, and I thought maybe I lost it. Then it knocked on my window. Just 3 taps, soft, polite. I screamed and swerved, barely keeping the car on the road. When I looked again, it was gone. My heart was pounding so loud I didn't hear the low hum at first. Then the radio came on. I hadn't touched it. There was no music, just static, and underneath it, breathing, deep, slow, wet breathing, like something just behind the speakers. Then a voice whispered, "You looked at me." I ripped the power cord from the dash. The radio died. The silence was worse. I didn't stop driving until I reached the outskirts of Flagstaff and pulled into a gas station, pale and shaking. The attendant didn't ask questions when I parked under the lights and refused to leave until sunrise. Later that morning, I told a Navajo woman at a local diner what I'd seen. She didn't laugh, didn't call me crazy. She just nodded once and said, "Skinwalker. It followed you because you noticed it. You gave it your attention." She told me not to say its name again, not to speak of it at night, not to think of its eyes before I sleep. I haven't taken that highway again, and I've never driven alone through the desert since. It was supposed to be a peaceful winter retreat. My cousin Ryan had invited me up to his family's old hunting cabin near Dulce, New Mexico. Isolated, quiet, snow-covered, perfect for a week away from the noise of everything. The locals in town had warned us not to go too deep into the hills, especially this time of year. The spirits walk when the snow falls, one old man said. We laughed it off, as tourists do. That was mistake number 1. The cabin was small, wooden, creaky, with no electricity and a wood burning stove that groaned when lit. Ryan had been there before, but this was my first time. I remember standing on the porch the first night, beer in hand, watching the snow fall, coat the pine trees. The wind was dead still, and then I heard it. A voice, faint but clear, coming from the woods. "Ryan, hey, Ryan." I turned to him, assuming it was a friend playing a joke, but Ryan had gone inside to grab more firewood. The voice came again, this time closer. "Ryan, come help me." I froze. It sounded like me, my own voice, calling for him from the trees. Ryan came out, saw my face, and dropped the logs. "You heard it too," he said quietly. We didn't sleep that night, just sat in silence, listening to the snowfall and the sounds outside. Something paced around the cabin. We never saw it, but around 3 a.m., it knocked 3 times. Slow, deliberate. We didn't answer. Ryan whispered an old Navajo phrase, something his grandfather taught him, then spit into the fire. I didn't understand the words, but whatever it meant, he looked terrified saying it. We boarded up the door and windows with anything we could find. The knocking came again the next night. Then a voice. This time it was his mother's voice. asking to come inside. "Ryan, honey, it's Mom. I'm so cold." He didn't move, just stared at the door, jaw clenched. The voice grew more desperate. "Please, let me in," then angry. "Open the door." I whispered to Ryan that we needed to leave at first lighten. I found the photo by accident. It was tucked in the back of my grandmother's old Bible, hidden between brittle pages that hadn't been touched in years. The image was black and white, for people standing in front of a trailer, desert in the background, all smiles. Except one, behind them, barely visible between two mesquite bushes, was something else. At first glance, it looked like a man, but the proportions were wrong. Its limbs were too long, face partially hidden in shadow, and the eyes, they weren't right. Not in the way glass reflects light. They looked alert, aware. I showed the photo to my mother. Her face drained of color, and she yanked it from my hands. She burned it in the kitchen sink without a word. Later that night, she came to my room with a flashlight and sat on the edge of the bed. "That picture," she whispered, "was taken 2 days before your uncle disappeared." I didn't know I had an uncle. His name was Daniel. He vanished when my mom was 14. They were camping near Shiprock, on land that technically belonged to the Navajo Nation, though my grandfather didn't care much about boundaries back then. Mom told me Daniel went out to relieve himself after dinner. He never came back. The next morning, they found his footprints circling the trailer 4, 5, 6 times, and then they just stopped, like he was lifted into the sky. No drag marks, no blood, just silence. My grandparents never spoke about it. My mom only did after seeing that picture again. She made me promise never to go near Shiprock. So of course, the very next weekend, I went. I was stupid. I admit it. I drove out alone, parked off the side of a dirt road, and hiked toward the monolith. It rose from the desert like a black tooth, jagged and foreboding. There were no birds, no wind. Even the insects were gone. I camped for the night, about a mile out, just enough to see the shadow of the rock under the moon. That's when I heard the crying, a child's voice, faint, echoing from somewhere nearby. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it around the campsite. Nothing. Then I saw the footprints. Small, barefoot, moving in a slow circle around my tent. Just like in the photo. They stopped about 4 feet away, and then the crying stopped too. I held my breath and scanned the darkness. That's when it crouched into view. Thin, too tall, bent at the knees like a man in a broken suit. Its head was wrong, long and narrow, like a coyote skull with skin stretched. Too tight it didn't move toward me, it just watched. Then it mimicked the crying again. Same sound, but flat, hollow, like a recording played from the bottom of a well. I ran. I left everything, tent, bag, food. I didn't stop until I hit the car and drove until the sun rose. When I got home, there were footprints on the front porch, small, barefoot, in a perfect circle. My mom moved us that same week. We never spoke about it again, but I still hear the crying. Sometimes, usually around 3 a.m., always from outside the window. And the sound, it's getting better at it. It was the year I took that job in northern Arizona, teaching middle school in a small reservation town. I had no family in the area, just me, my car, and a 1-bedroom trailer the school district arranged. It wasn't glamorous, but I was in that phase of my 20s where loneliness felt like an adventure. The locals were kind, if quiet. My students were a mix of rowdy and respectful, and within weeks, I knew who had crushes on whom, who hated math, and who was hiding bruises under their sleeves. One student, in particular, stood out, Alina. She was 12, small for her age, and sharp. But she always sat near the window, as far from the door as possible, and she watched the woods, not stared, watched. One Friday afternoon, as class was ending, I asked her why. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "There's something out there that likes voices." I laughed it off, but she didn't. She stood, packed her bag, and before leaving said something that stuck with me like a splinter. "If you hear your name out there, don't answer. It's not someone who misses you." That night, I stayed late to grade papers. The school was quiet, the desert outside humming with cicadas. I opened the window to let in the cool evening air, and that's when I heard it, faint, distant, but unmistakable. My name, Mr. Callahan. It wasn't Elena. It was a woman's voice, warm, familiar in a way I couldn't place. I stepped out into the hallway, looked around, then walked toward the back exit where the sound had seemed to come from. The moment one pushed open the door, a rush of dry air hit my face. Nothing, just the playground, the fence, the low hills in the distance. Then I heard it again, closer, Mr. Callahan. It was coming from beyond the school's fence, in the brush. I turned my flashlight on and walked toward the sound, each step feeling heavier than the last. The beam caught movement, a flash of gray fur, then gone. A coyote, nothing more. But then it happened. The coyote stood, on two legs, slowly, awkwardly, like someone learning to walk for the first time. Its joints bent the wrong way. Its face twitched, elongated, and then it opened its mouth. "Mr. Callahan," I froze. I couldn't scream, I couldn't even run. It tilted its head and smiled. Yes, smiled. Then it dropped to all fours and vanished into the scrub. I didn't sleep that night. Monday morning, I went to the principal and asked about Alina. He looked confused. "Alina," he said. "She hasn't been in your class this semester. She moved to New Mexico last spring." I showed him her name on my roster. He stared at it for a long time, then shook his head. "There must be a mistake. I left the job that winter. Haven't gone back since. But I've heard my name in other places, while hiking, while camping, always from the woods, and now I keep a rule. If I hear a voice when I know I'm alone, I don't answer. Not ever." We were staying at my cousin's cabin for the week, a rundown but cozy place tucked deep into the high desert of New Mexico, about 30 minutes from the nearest paved road. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, just tall pines, rocky soil, and an old, cast iron stove that moaned like a ghost when it cooled at night. My cousin Daniel had warned me about the thing in the woods, said it half jokingly, over a beer by the fire. "You'll hear it whistle," he said, throwing a log into the flames. "But don't whistle back." I laughed. He didn't. The rest of the group, my girlfriend Sophie, my younger brother Kevin, and Daniel's girlfriend Maria, had all gone to bed. I stayed up with Daniel a while longer, asking him what he meant. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter unless you answer it. It just wants a response." Later that night, long after I'd gone to bed, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest, like something was sitting on me. I couldn't move for a second, couldn't speak. The cabin was dead silent, save for the low creaking of the trees outside. Then I heard it, a whistle, long, clear, almost tuneful, like someone whistling a lullaby just outside the window. It repeated, once, twice, then silence. I stayed frozen, unsure if I'd dreamed it. Then, in the dark, Kevin, who was sleeping in a cot across the room, whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, not speaking. Another whistle. Closer this time. Sophie stirred beside me. What's that? Daniel's voice came from the hallway. Don't talk. Don't answer it. We stayed that way for over an hour. No one moved. No one spoke. The whistling circled the cabin, once to the left, then the right. It stopped behind the kitchen, then again near the back door. Finally, it stopped. The next morning, we found something strange in the dirt outside. Footprints, but not regular ones. They looked like bare human feet, long and narrow, except the toes were wrong. Too many, almost claw-like. And they went in circles, around the cabin, over and over. That was the last night we stayed. A month later, I found a video on my phone. I didn't record it. I don't remember anyone using the camera. It was dark, barely visible. Just the corner of the cabin and a bit of the woods. But the sound was clear. A whistle. Then, my voice. Whistling back. But I swear to you, I never did. And if I did, I don't remember now. Every so often, in the dead of night, when the house is still and the heater kicks off, I think I hear it. That whistle. And deep down, I wonder, did I already answer it? Or is it still waiting? I was 17 when we spent that cursed winter in Shiprock, New Mexico. My mother had taken a job with a tribal clinic and moved us into a rental house just off a narrow stretch of desert road. There were only a few other homes nearby, and most of them looked long abandoned. Broken windows, rusted out trucks, the wind whistling through empty frames. I had one sibling, Ben. He was 2 years older than me. Strong, quiet, protective. We'd always been close. But something about that winter started changing him. It began with the coyotes. They'd howl every night around 2 a.m. Not the usual chorus, either. This was off. It was like they were mimicking the sound of coyotes, rather than being actual ones. Sometimes it was too high-pitched. Sometimes too human. Then Ben started sleepwalking the first time. I found him standing outside our front door, in nothing but a t-shirt and jeans, barefoot in the snow, just standing there, looking into the distance. When I shook him awake, he turned to me slowly and whispered, "He's calling me." "Who?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just went back inside and climbed into bed. The next day, I asked him about it. He had no memory of the night before, brushed it off. Over the following week, it got worse. I'd wake up and find him staring into corners of the room. One night, he was crouched beneath the living room window, whispering, "Not yet, not yet." I began to hear things too, shuffling in the attic, clicks outside the windows, the occasional tap, tap, tap on the glass just past 3 a.m. I tried telling my mom, but she thought I was just being dramatic. Then came the night, everything unraveled. I woke up to the sound of our dog, Murphy, growling. Low, deep, dangerous. I slipped out of bed, crept toward the hallway, and froze. Ben was standing in the kitchen doorway, naked, covered in dirt and blood. His eyes were open, but empty, like no one was home. Murphy barked, lunged toward him, and stopped. And then Ben smiled. It wasn't his smile. Not really. It was too wide, too many teeth, and his jaw cracked as it stretched. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then he said, in a voice just slightly wrong, "You're not supposed to see me yet." I ran, locked myself in my room, cried until morning. The next day, Ben was normal, sitting at the table, eating cereal like nothing had happened. But Murphy wouldn't go near him, wouldn't even look at him. That was the last day I ever saw my real brother. The next night, I woke up to Ben standing at the foot of my bed, except it wasn't Ben, it was something wearing him. Its skin looked too tight in places and too loose in others. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet on strings. It leaned in close and whispered, "He gave me the bones." I just had to take the voice. I passed out. When I came to, I was outside, barefoot in the dirt. The sun was rising. Ben was gone. We never found his body. But once a year, on the same night, in February, something taps on my window at 3:17 a.m., and I hear his voice say, "Let me in, I'm cold." But I know it's not him, and I know if I ever open the window, I won't come back either. I was 22 when I decided to take a break from city life and houses at my uncle's cabin in northern New Mexico. He had a ranch-style place tucked into the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, near a Navajo community. I was recovering from a bad breakup, and he figured the peace and quiet would do me some good. I brought my dog, Buster, a big black lab, pit mix. Loyal, gentle, a little dumb, but fiercely protective. The cabin had no internet, no cell service, and barely working electricity, so we filled our days with hiking and our nights with campfires and books. It was perfect. For the first few nights, on the fourth night, just as the sun dipped below the ridge, Buster started acting weird. His hackles stood straight up, and he began pacing in circles near the back door. I thought it was a coyote, or maybe a mountain lion nearby. I tried to calm him down, but he kept growling low and deep, something I'd never heard from him before. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of Buster barking like mad. I stumbled into the living room in my boxers, heart pounding, and saw him standing at the sliding glass door, teeth bared. The motion sensor light outside was on. Something was moving near the tree line. I flipped on the porch light. Nothing, but Buster wouldn't stop barking. I stepped outside with my flashlight, and that's when I noticed the smell, like rotting meat and wet dog. It made my eyes water. I scanned the woods. Just silence, until I heard it. A voice, but not just any voice. It was mine. "Buster, come here, boy." I froze. I hadn't said anything. The voice echoed from just beyond the trees, mimicking my tone, my inflection, but it was just off, like someone trying too hard to sound human, too perfect, too robotic. Buster whimpered and backed up behind me. Then it came again, louder. "Buster, come here." This time it sounded angry, sharp, like it was tired of pretending. I ran back inside, locked the door, and grabbed the rifle my uncle kept in the hall closet. Buster wouldn't leave my side. The thing, whatever it was, kept pacing outside the cabin. I could hear it crunching through leaves and brush, tapping on the windows. Sometimes it scratched, sometimes it laughed. The next morning, there were handprints all over the windows, smudged and greasy, like someone had dragged their palms across the glass. But the prints were wrong. The fingers were too long, the palms too wide, and they weren't at human height. Some were down low, as if a person had been crawling on all fours. I wanted to leave, but I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a trespasser messing with me. A local prankster. Something explainable, until the third night. I was asleep when Buster woke me up by jumping onto the bed. He was shaking, whining, trying to burrow under the covers. Then I heard it again, my voice, right outside the bedroom window. "Come out, you coward." I held my breath. Then I heard a second voice, Buster's voice. "I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm scared." It repeated over and over, like a broken toy, except dogs can't talk. I grabbed the rifle, slowly peeked through the blinds, and saw two figures in the yard. One was hunched and long-limbed, naked, but covered in dirt and something dark. Its face was mostly hidden, but I saw enough to know it wasn't human. The other was standing on two legs, smaller, with something dangling from its hands, something that looked like a deer carcass, but it wasn't shaped right. Its legs were bent the wrong way. Then the talking stopped, and the bigger one turned, its head completely around to face me. I fell backward. The lights flickered. The scratching returned, violent this time, furious, like it wanted in. Then, silence. I don't know when I passed out, but I woke up on the floor with Buster on top of me, still trembling. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. We left that morning, packed the truck, and never looked back. I told my uncle, and he just nodded. "You were lucky," he said. "You didn't answer it." He later told me about the stories, about the Skinwalkers, evil witches that could wear the skin of animals, imitate voices, sometimes even memories. The elders said they came to confuse you, lure you, steal your soul if you were foolish enough to follow the sound of someone you loved. I don't care what it was. All I know is Buster never barked again. I didn't grow up believing in anything supernatural. Ghosts, spirits, monsters, they were all just stories to me. That changed the year I moved into a cheap studio apartment on the edge of the Navajo Nation. I had just graduated from college and taken a teaching job at a rural elementary school. The pay was low, but rent was even lower. The apartment complex was a rundown, two-story building that looked abandoned except for a handful of other young professionals and a maintenance guy named Joel, who rarely spoke. From day one, something felt off about the place. The lights flickered even after the landlord claimed the wiring had been redone. Shadows lingered in the corners longer than they should have, and there was this smell in the hallway, like dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Still, I needed the job. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. One night, after a long day of work, I fell asleep on the couch, with the TV still on. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up without knowing why. No noise, no movement, just this intense feeling, like someone was standing over me. I slowly opened my eyes, expecting to see the screen glowing in the dark, but the TV was off. Instead, I saw a figure standing just past the edge of the couch, not moving, just watching. I thought I was dreaming, but I blinked, and it was still there, tall, slouched, and wrong. It wasn't just the way it stood, it was how it felt, like it absorbed light, instead of reflecting it, like it wasn't meant to exist in this world. I couldn't see its face, only a dark outline. Then it took a step closer, and I finally managed to scramble to my feet. When I turned on the lamp, the room was empty. The door was locked. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I noticed something strange on my windowsill, a long, greasy handprint, like someone had pressed their palm there from the outside. But my apartment was on the second floor. I showed Joel, the maintenance guy. He stared at it for a long time, then looked at me and said, "Don't leave your windows open, and if you hear your name at night, don't answer." I asked him what he meant, but he just walked away. That same week, the dreams started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing voices whispering just beyond the walls. My name, my memories, my mother's voice, calling me home, even though she lived 300 miles away. I started sleeping with the lights on. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up and saw something crawling across the ceiling. Its limbs were all wrong, bent, backward, twitching like an insect. Its face was human, but stretched unnaturally wide. It was smiling. Its eyes glowed like animal eyes in a trail cam. Then, it spoke, in my own voice. "You look better asleep," I screamed, threw a lamp at it, and when I turned the lights on, it was gone. Again. That was the night I packed a bag and drove to a motel 30 miles away. The next morning, Joel called me. "Stay away from the apartment tonight," he said. "It's following you now." He didn't say what it was, only that it wasn't human. A skinwalker, he said. Someone who gave themselves over to dark medicine, to become something else. Something that could steal your shape, your memories, your voice. Something that hated light and loved fear. I didn't go back. I left everything I owned and never returned. I broke my lease, quit my job, and moved back home. I never told my parents what happened. They wouldn't believe me anyway. But sometimes, late at night, I hear my voice calling from outside my window, soft, familiar, asking to be let back in. I was 17 the summer it happened. My parents had sent me to stay with my grandmother in Gallup, New Mexico, while they dealt with my dad's medical issues in the city. Grandma's house was isolated, an old adobe home on the edge of the high desert, with no neighbors for miles. She lived simple. Candles, well water, wood stove, no TV, no internet. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. But then, the scratching started. The first night it happened, I thought it was a coyote pawing at the door. Grandma just muttered something in Navajo under her breath and tossed cedar dust into the fire. The flames flared green for a second. "Don't open any doors at night," she warned. That was all she said. By the third night, the scratching had become scraping, like long fingernails against wood. And not just the front door, windows too. It circled the house, slowly. Whatever it was, it wanted in. That's when I heard it speak. It was my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, open up. I came early. It's me. Let me in, baby." I shot up from bed. My heart was pounding, but the voice, it sounded perfect. Too perfect. Like it was copied from a memory. I peeked through the window and froze. There was someone standing at the door. She looked exactly like my mother. Same face, same hair, same blue sweater from that Christmas years ago. But she was just standing there, unmoving, like a mannequin. And her eyes, something was wrong with them. Too black, too wide. She smiled. "Don't you love me anymore?" I slammed the curtain shut. I heard footsteps then, fast and heavy, circling the house again. Windows shook. The voice called from every direction. My mom, my dad, even my little brother's voice from years ago. I clutched my grandmother's old rosary and cried quietly, just before dawn. It stopped. The next morning, Grandma saw my pale face and knew. She sat me down and placed a pouch of herbs in my hand. "You saw one of them, a skeptical. It wore your mother's face, but it wasn't her. They do that when they want your soul to open the door." I asked her how she knew. She looked out the window with tired eyes and whispered, "Because years ago, it wore my sister's." That night, I stayed up with Grandma. She burned sage and chanted old words. Just after midnight, the voice came. Back mine dot from the door. It whispered, "Please, let me back in. I'm cold." Grandma didn't even blink. "Don't speak to it," she said. "Don't even think about opening that door." The next day, I called my parents. They were safe. Still in the hospital. Nothing had changed. But something had changed in me. Now, even back in the city, I keep a pouch of cedar by my bed. I don't open doors after dark. And when the wind howls just right and carries voices that sound too familiar, I turn away. Because the Skinwalker remembers, and it never comes wearing its own face. It started on the last night of our camping trip in northern Arizona. My cousin Eric and I had been backpacking through the high desert for 3 days. We were trying to disconnect. No phones, no GPS, just paper maps and instinct. That last night, we made camp near a dry wash at the edge of a sandstone canyon. The sky was clear, the fire was warm, and everything felt still. Too still. Around midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. That's when I first heard it, whistling low and off key, like someone trying to mimic a song they didn't quite know. It came from the ditch below us. At first I figured it was another camper, but there were no other campsites for miles, and no one had passed us on the trail. I stood there for a minute, listening, trying to find the rhythm in the sound, but the longer I listened, the more it felt intentional, like it was calling to me. I backed into the tent and zipped it up. Didn't even bother relieving myself. I lay there quietly, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Eric was still asleep. Then the whistling stopped, and a voice whispered, "Are you awake?" I froze. It wasn't Eric's voice. It was thin and too high-pitched, like someone imitating human speech, but not understanding how mouths work. I didn't answer. I didn't move. But I swear I felt it, whatever it was, standing outside the tent. Minutes passed. Then something brushed the fabric. Slow, like a hand tracing along the nylon dot. And then, "You smelled different than the others." That's when Eric finally stirred. He sat up and muttered, "What the hell?" As the tent shook slightly, I whispered, "Don't speak. Don't move." He heard it then too. The breathing, the soft exhale of something big just beyond the fabric. Then the whistling started again, closer, louder, and completely tuneless. Eric reached for his pocket knife. I grabbed my flashlight, ready to blind whatever it was. But before we could do anything, it stopped. Gone. We waited for an hour before unzipping the tent. The fire was out, the woods were silent. But near the edge of the wash, in the moonlight, we saw prints. Deep, long prints in the dust. Like a man's foot, but too long, with claw marks at the toes. And only one set, no return trail. We didn't sleep. At sunrise, we packed our gear in record time. As we hiked out, Eric kept turning around, saying he felt like we were being followed. I didn't disagree. It wasn't until we got back to the truck that we saw the final sign, on the hood, written in the dirt, were the words, "Almost mine." We never went back to that canyon, and now, when I hear someone whistling a broken tune in the distance, I shut the blinds and lock the doors. Because I know the Skinwalker doesn't just watch from the woods, it remembers. I was 17 the summer it happened. My parents had sent me to stay with my grandmother in Gallup, New Mexico, while they dealt with my dad's medical issues in the city. Grandma's house was isolated, an old adobe home on the edge of the high desert, with no neighbors for miles. She lived simple: candles, well water, wood stove, no TV, no internet. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. But then, the scratching started. The first night it happened, I thought it was a coyote pawing at the door. Grandma just muttered something in Navajo under her breath and tossed cedar dust into the fire. The flames flared green for a second. "Don't open any doors at night," she warned. That was all she said. By the third night, the scratching had become scraping, like long fingernails against wood. And not just the front door, windows too. It circled the house, slowly. Whatever it was, it wanted in. That's when I heard it speak. It was my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, open up. I came early. It's me. Let me in, baby." I shot up from bed. My heart was pounding, but the voice, it sounded perfect. Too perfect. Like it was copied from a memory. I peeked through the window and froze. There was someone standing at the door. She looked exactly like my mother. Same face, same hair, same blue sweater from that Christmas years ago. But she was just standing there, unmoving, like a mannequin. And her eyes, something was wrong with them. Too black, too wide. She smiled. "Don't you love me anymore?" I slammed the curtain shut. I heard footsteps then, fast and heavy, circling the house again. Windows shook. The voice called from every direction. My mom, my dad, even my little brother's voice from years ago. I clutched my grandmother's old rosary and cried quietly, just before dawn. It stopped. The next morning, Grandma saw my pale face and knew. She sat me down and placed a pouch of herbs in my hand. "You saw one of them, a skeptical. It wore your mother's face, but it wasn't her. They do that when they want your soul to open the door." I asked her how she knew. She looked out the window with tired eyes and whispered, "Because years ago, it wore my sister's." That night, I stayed up with Grandma. She burned sage and chanted old words. Just after midnight, the voice came. Back mine dot from the door. It whispered, "Please, let me back in. I'm cold." Grandma didn't even blink. "Don't speak to it," she said. "Don't even think about opening that door." The next day, I called my parents. They were safe. Still in the hospital. Nothing had changed. But something had changed in me. Now, even back in the city, I keep a pouch of cedar by my bed. I don't open doors after dark. And when the wind howls just right and carries voices that sound too familiar, I turn away. Because the Skinwalker remembers, and it never comes wearing its own face. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. I was 24, fresh out of college, and trying to reconnect with my older brother, James. We'd drifted apart after our parents' divorce, and he thought some time in nature would help. He picked a remote hiking trail in southern Utah, near Navajo territory, a place he said he found on some backwoods forum. There was barely a map, no official park signs. Just red dirt, scrubland, and miles of silence. We parked the truck near an old cattle gate, loaded our gear, and started walking. For the first few hours, everything was fine. Hot sun, buzzing flies, the crunch of boots on dry gravel. But then we found the ditch. It was about 8 feet deep, running parallel to the trail like a long scar. James paused and stared at it. "Wasn't on the map," he muttered. "Looks like it was dug recently." I stepped closer and saw something that made my skin crawl. Hoof prints. But they weren't right. They were shaped like deer prints, but too wide and deeper than they should have been. Heavy. Wrong. Probably just some big elk. James shrugged. But I'd hunted elk. These weren't elk tracks. That night, we set up camp under a canopy of stars. The fire crackled low, and we passed a flask back and forth, trying to laugh off the weird tracks. Then we heard the scream. Not a coyote, not a mountain lion, something in between. Long, drawn out, and laced with human pain. It echoed through the trees, rising and falling like it was circling us. We froze. James grabbed a network error occurred. "Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.openai.com. I used to work nights on a cattle ranch in northern Arizona. Just me, an old horse named Harley, and the stars. It was peaceful, isolated, the kind of place where the wind howls like ghosts, and the coyotes sing lullabies to the moon. The owners, the Martins, were kind folks, but warned me from day one, don't go out past the ridge after dark. I laughed it off, thought it was just local superstition. Something about Skinwalkers' shape, shifters from old Navajo legends. The Martins didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. That was my mistake. It was early October when it happened. The nights had grown cold, and I was doing a routine check on the northern pasture. Some of the younger cattle had been acting spooked lately, refusing to graze, huddling near the fences, staring off into the dark like something was out there. I took Harley and headed out around 9 p.m. The moon was fat and low, casting a pale yellow light over the field. For the first mile or so, everything seemed normal. Crickets, wind, and the creak of saddle leather. Then Harley froze, ears back, breathing hard. I looked in the direction he was facing and saw something at the far end of the pasture, just beyond the tree line. A man, or what looked like one, standing perfectly still. He was naked, pale, lean, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. I called out, "You okay out there?" No answer. The figure twitched, took one slow, stuttering step forward. Harley reared nearly through me. When I calmed him down, the man was gone. I rode closer, against my better judgment. I found tracks, but not boot prints. Bare feet, long toes, deep indentations, like something walking with a limp or dragging one leg. Then I heard my name, Colt, soft, breathless, from behind me. I spun. No one was there. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and Harley started to back away, snorting. That's when I heard the scream. It sounded like a woman in agony, wailing and snarling at the same time. It came from the ridge. I didn't hesitate. I kicked Harley into a gallop, back toward the barn. We didn't stop until we were inside the stables with the doors locked. When I looked back through the slats of the barn wall, I saw it. It had my face, but it was crouched on all fours like an animal. Its mouth was too wide, eyes too black, and it whispered my name again and again like it was trying to remember how to use it. Colt, Colt, Colt. I quit the next morning. The Martins didn't argue. They just handed me my last check and told me to never speak of what I saw. I never went back, but sometimes, on cold nights, I dream of Harley winning in panic, and a voice that isn't mine, wearing my face, calling out from the ridge. I never believed in Skinwalkers. I always thought they were just stories, tales passed down by locals to scare tourists, much like Bigfoot or the Jersey Devil. I was wrong. It was 3 years ago, during the summer, when my friend Jacob invited me to spend a weekend at his family's cabin in the mountains. It was supposed to be a weekend of hiking, fishing, and escaping the noise of city life. I wasn't prepared for what we were about to experience. The cabin was located in a remote part of northern Arizona, near the Navajo reservation. It wasn't accessible by paved roads. You had to drive down dirt trails, through thick pine forests, and cross a few streams. It was exactly the kind of place I wanted to escape to. Jacob had been coming here every year with his family since he was a kid, and he swore by the tranquility it provided. When we arrived, I noticed the place was isolated, and not a single other cabin was in sight for miles. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of branches in the wind and the distant calls of birds. It felt peaceful, but there was something about it, the way the woods felt alive, like they were watching us. I dismissed it as overactive imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The first night, everything seemed fine. We sat around the fire pit, drinking beer and talking about old times. Jacob's father had built the cabin, and they had used it as a getaway for decades. As the night grew darker, the wind picked up, making the trees creak and groan. Then we heard it at first. I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote or some other wildlife, but as it came closer, I realized it was something else. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard, a low, guttural growl, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Jacob and I exchanged nervous glances, and I noticed that his expression had changed. His father, who had been telling a story, stopped mid-sentence and looked around the campfire. "It's probably just a bear," I said, trying to ease the tension. Jacob's father shook his head. "Bears don't walk that quietly," he murmured, his voice tight. "That's something else." He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness between the trees. "We need to get inside, now." We all rushed into the cabin, and Jacob locked the door behind us. The growling continued outside, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of something heavy brushing against the side of the cabin. There was a moment of eerie silence, followed by a loud thud, something slamming into the wall. It was then that we heard it. A voice that wasn't quite human. "Jacob, help me. Let me in." It sounded like his mother. Her voice was distorted, trembling, and mixed with the growls, making it impossible to tell whether it was truly her. But Jacob's face turned pale as he bolted to the window. "No," he whispered, backing away from the glass. "It's not her." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" That's not my mom's voice," he said, shaking. "My mom, she's gone. She passed away years ago." His father's eyes darkened. "Stay inside. Don't open that door. Don't let it in." The sounds outside grew louder. Scratching, tapping, and then scratching at the door. "Jacob, please let me in. It's cold." This time, the voice was close. Too close. Jacob's father grabbed him by the shoulders, his grip tight. "Do you remember what I told you?" "What?" "We never speak of..." Jacob nodded, wide-eyed. "We don't let them in," his father said in a hoarse whisper. "Of Skinwalkers, they can mimic the voices of anyone they want. If they want you to let them in, it's because they're not human." I could hear the terror in his voice. Jacob had gone pale as the color drained from his face. His father turned to me, his face grim. "It's not your friend outside. Whatever you hear, you don't open that door." And then it came. The thing outside the door stopped, scratching. The voice changed again. This time, it was my voice. It called out to me, pleading, begging for help. "Please, help me, it's cold. I'm out here in the woods alone." I froze. Jacob's father stood between me and the door. "Stay back," he warned me. "Don't even look outside." The voice outside continued, but this time it was accompanied by a low, almost gurgling laugh. It wasn't my voice anymore. It was something darker, deeper, something that wasn't human. The growls resumed, but now they were closer, more aggressive. The walls of the cabin creaked as something heavy brushed against them. I felt the floor vibrate beneath my feet, and I could sense that whatever it was, whatever they were, was circling the cabin. Suddenly, the growls stopped. Silence. Jacob's father moved swiftly, bolting all the shutters on the windows. He checked every door, making sure it was secure. Then, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, he spoke again. "They're not done with us. They'll come back. We'll stay locked in here until the sun comes up." That night felt like it lasted an eternity. The growls and the voices never stopped, just circling the cabin in an endless loop. In the morning, we finally dared to leave the cabin, though the woods felt strangely empty. The air was still thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to move in ways it shouldn't. We packed up and left as quickly as possible, but the sound of that voice, my voice, haunts me to this day. I don't know if it was the wind playing tricks or something darker, but I know this: some stories aren't just myths, and sometimes the things you hear in the dark aren't human at all. We were deep in Navajo country, camping on Bureau of Land Management territory. Me, my college roommate Terry, and his cousin Marcus, who had grown up in the area. It was supposed to be a bonding weekend. No phones, no GPS, just firewood, beer, and stories. The kind of trip you remember for the peace, not the terror. We set up camp near a dry creek bed just past sundown. The desert was quiet, except for the wind rustling through the juniper. Marcus built a fire while Terry dug out his speaker and started playing old outlaw country. But Marcus frowned, double quotes, "Turn it off," he said. Sharp. Terry chuckled. "What? You scared the coyotes are gonna sue us for noise pollution?" Marcus didn't laugh. They hear music, they get curious, and some of what walks these lands, you don't want it curious. That killed the mood real quick. We sat in silence for a bit. Then Marcus leaned forward and said, "You want to hear something real?" He told us about Skinwalkers. Said his grandmother once saw one wearing the face of her dead brother, standing in her backyard at dawn. Said his uncle chased what looked like a dog on two legs off their land, only to find a neighbor, naked and dazed, walking out of the woods an hour later. We all laughed nervously. Ghost stories, campfire tales. But Marcus didn't crack a smile. The fire burned low. That's when we heard it, a woman's voice, crying from just beyond the firelight. Sounded like it was coming from across the creek bed. Marcus stood up immediately. "Get inside the truck, now," Terry whispered. "Maybe she's hurt. No one cries out here at night, unless they want something." We hesitated too long. A shape stepped into view, just outside the reach of the flames. A woman, bent over, with impossibly long limbs and tangled hair that looked more like animal fur. She wasn't crying anymore. She was mimicking it, repeating the same sob over and over, like a recording. Glitching. Marcus picked up a burning log from the fire, holding it like a torch. The woman hissed. I swear to God, her skin shifted, like it was crawling over something else, and her eyes, flat, reflective like a goat's, locked onto me. She spoke with my voice. "Help me, please." We ran. We didn't stop until we were inside the truck, tires spinning in red dirt. Marcus drove like a man possessed, muttering a prayer under his breath the entire way back to the highway. None of us spoke for the rest of the night. Later, when I checked the audio recorder I'd brought to document the trip, I found the firelight, crackling, our stories, laughter, and over it, a voice, my voice. But it was whispering things I never said, things I've never thought, things that still make my skin crawl. It started when I took a seasonal job in rural Utah, helping an old friend of my dad's harvest his late summer crops. I had just turned 20 and was eager to get away from the noise of city life after a messy breakup and a couple of rough semesters in college. The land was vast and quiet, miles of golden fields and towering mountain silhouettes that looked like sleeping giants when the sun dipped low. To some, it might have felt peaceful. To me, it felt watched. Harold, the man I worked for, was in his 60s, gruff but kind. He lived alone, just outside a tiny town that barely made it onto maps. He gave me a trailer to stay in, right on the edge of his property, overlooking a stretch of corn that seemed to go on forever. The first few days were uneventful. Early mornings, sunburns, and the kind of tired that settles in your bones. But one night, about a week in, everything changed. I woke up to a soft rustling just outside my trailer. It was around 3 a.m., I remember, because I'd been checking the time compulsively, unable to fall asleep. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the stalks. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the trailer. My heart raced. I peeked through the blinds, expecting to see a coyote, or maybe Harold coming to check something. Instead, I saw a man. Only, it wasn't quite a man. He stood completely still, back to me, just a few feet from the trailer steps. His limbs were oddly long, joints exaggerated, like a scarecrow come to life. His head turned, not naturally, but with a twitch, like he was trying to figure out what direction I was in, and then he mimicked my voice. Hey, it's me. Open up. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't made a sound, but somehow, it said those words in my voice, with my hesitation, my rhythm. I didn't open the door. I just sat there, frozen, as it circled again, dragging something along the aluminum wall. A fingernail, a knife, I never saw. After a while, the noises stopped. I waited until morning to run to Harold's house. When I told him what happened, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He sat me down, poured a stiff drink, and told me about the Skinwalkers. They wear your skin like a coat, he said. Not always literally, but they take parts of you. Your voice, your walk, the way you breathe when you're scared. That's how they get close. That's how they fool you. I stayed in his house the rest of my time there. Never went back to that trailer. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I still hear it, my voice, just outside the window, whispering to come in, and I never do. I was 16 when it happened, and even now, more than a decade later, I still check over my shoulder every time winter comes. Not because I'm scared of the cold or the snow, but because of what I saw out there in the wilderness, a memory that bites sharper than frost. My uncle had a small hunting cabin deep in the woods near the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. It was isolated, no neighbors for miles, no cell reception, just pure wilderness. That year, during winter break, my cousin Leo and I were invited to stay with him. We were restless teenagers, always chasing a thrill, and this trip seemed like the perfect adventure. The cabin was old, but cozy. It had one big room with 2 cots and a stone fireplace that never went out. Outside, snow blanketed everything. The stillness was mesmerizing at first, until it wasn't. The first few days went by quietly. We helped our uncle cut firewood, set traps, and cooked meals on a cast iron stove. It felt like stepping back in time. But the silence at night started getting to me. It wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. One morning, we woke up to find the forest floor covered in a fresh blanket of snow. My uncle had gone out early to check his traps, leaving a trail of boot prints in the snow. Leo and I, feeling brave and a little bored, decided to follow the trail and catch up to him. We bundled up, grabbed the rifles he had trained us to use, and headed into the woods. It was quiet, eerily quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of snow under our boots. About half a mile in, the tracks split. My uncle's boots went one way, and another set of tracks, larger, barefoot, cut across them. These prints weren't normal. They were huge, easily twice the size of ours, and definitely not human. They looked almost like a human foot, but the toes were long, curled, with deep claw marks at the end. The stride was wide, predatory against better judgment. We followed those prints. I kept telling myself it was a prank, maybe some other hunter playing games, or an animal we didn't recognize. But the longer we tracked it, the more I felt something was watching us. The air grew heavy, like we were walking through water. We came to a small clearing, and that's when we saw it. At first glance, it looked like a deer, standing upright on 2 legs. But its body was wrong, too thin, bones sticking out unnaturally under its pale, grayish skin. Its neck stretched too far, head twitching side to side like a broken marionette. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like it was wearing a suit of skin that didn't quite fit. It stared at us. Then it spoke. "Leo," it said. The voice was our uncle's. Leo froze. His name echoed in the clearing, sounding wrong, like it was coming from a recording that had been distorted and slowed down. "Leo," it repeated. This time, more urgent. I grabbed his arm and whispered, "Do not talk. Do not move." But he was paralyzed. The creature took a step forward. Snow crunched beneath its long, gnarled feet, just like the tracks we'd followed. It tilted its head, the way a predator sizes up its prey, and then it smiled. That broke whatever trance Leo was in. He screamed, dropped his rifle, and bolted. I followed, adrenaline pushing me faster than I thought possible. The woods blurred as branches slapped against my face. I didn't dare look back. We didn't stop running until the cabin came into view. We slammed the door shut, locked it, and collapsed by the fire. My uncle returned an hour later. When we told him what we saw, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he stood, pulled down a hidden pouch of dried sage from the mantel, and started burning it. He walked in circles around the cabin, chanting softly in a language I didn't recognize. Then he sat us down and looked us in the eyes. "You never follow strange tracks," he said, "and if something calls your name in the woods, you do not answer it, ever." That night, something brushed against the cabin wall. A single scratch, just enough to let us know it was still out there. We left the next morning before the sun was fully up. The trees were silent. The tracks were gone, but something watched us as we packed up and drove away. It's been years. I've lived in cities since then, far from the woods. But when winter comes and snow falls quiet outside my window, I sometimes hear something just beyond the edge of hearing. A whisper, a name, and I never, ever answer it, because I know it remembers mine too. It was supposed to be just a college getaway. A group of us, 6 friends from the University of Utah, headed out to a friend's family cabin near Navajo territory for a long weekend. We were all in our early 20s, burned out from finals, looking for nothing more than a few nights of drinking and stories around a bonfire. The cabin sat alone, about 20 minutes off the main road, surrounded by nothing but open land and distant tree lines. On our second night, we built a big fire in the pit behind the house, turned up music, and passed around beers. Someone pulled out a Bluetooth speaker, and we started playing horror stories for laughs. That was when Jonah, whose family owned the cabin, turned serious. "You guys ever hear of Skinwalkers?" he asked. Some of us had, vaguely, shape-shifting witches from Navajo lore. People who could wear the skin of animals. Jonah's grandfather had told him stories, warnings, really, not to joke or speak about them too openly, especially on tribal land. We laughed it off. It was around 1:30 a.m. when someone noticed the figure, just beyond the firelight. A man, or what looked like a man. He stood completely still, just inside the shadows of the trees, watching. No one heard him walk up. No one saw where he came from. "Hey," Kyle called out. "You okay, man?" Number answer. He didn't move, just stared. Jonah went pale. "Don't talk to him. Don't invite him closer." We all fell silent. You could feel the change in the air, sudden cold despite the fire's heat. The music cut out. The Bluetooth disconnected by itself. Then the man laughed. But it wasn't right. It was high-pitched, too loud, like he didn't know how to mimic human laughter properly, and he began moving forward in short, jolting motions, like he was being pulled by strings. I swear to you, his eyes reflected the fire like an animal's. We bolted, ran straight into the cabin, locked every door, and shut the blinds. But even from inside, We could hear him circling, scraping. I thought I saw his shadow pass by the front window more than once. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that looked stretched. He stayed out there until dawn. When the sun finally came up, we opened the door. There were no footprints. Not in the mud, not in the gravel, nothing. Just scorch marks in the grass where he'd stood watching. We left that morning. Jonah never went back to that cabin, and neither did we. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still see the way that stranger moved, the way something wore a human shape like it didn't fit. Like it was pretending, and waiting for someone to invite it in. It was the summer I turned 16 when everything changed. My family and I were living on a small piece of land in rural Arizona, far enough away from the nearest town that we could go days without seeing another soul. The house was an old ranch-style home that had been passed down for generations. We had horses, a couple of cows, and a sprawling garden. Life was peaceful, though often lonely. But there was one thing that always seemed off. The mountains to the north. They were beautiful, jagged peaks that towered over the landscape, but they were also isolated, wild, and unknown. The locals always seemed a little uneasy when the subject came up, and there was always a hint of caution in their eyes when we talked about going up there. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. It seemed like one of those small, town superstitions that people cling to when life gets quiet. It all started on a quiet night in late September. I had been out with my friends, hanging out by the lake, just messing around and enjoying the last days of warmth before the chill of fall set in. By the time I got back home, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains, and the air had turned cool. As I walked up the gravel driveway, I noticed that the house was unusually quiet. I figured my parents were either in bed or working on something inside. I went in through the back door, dropped my bag, and grabbed a snack from the fridge. It wasn't until I started to head upstairs that I heard it, whispering at first. I thought it was just the wind, but there was something unnerving about it. It didn't sound like any wind I had ever heard before. It wasn't the usual howling gusts that rattled the windows in the winter. This was different. It was soft, insistent, and strangely familiar. I froze halfway up the stairs. The whispering was coming from the living room. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me, and I crept down the hall. The light in the living room was on, casting long shadows on the walls. I peered around the corner, expecting to find my parents, but no one was there. The whispering was louder now, almost as if it was beckoning me to step into the room. Come closer, it seemed to say. I swallowed hard, my heart racing in my chest. I was about to step forward when I saw them. Shadows, no, not shadows, figures, standing at the far end of the room, near the windows, just outside the pool of light. They were tall, impossibly tall, and their limbs twisted in unnatural ways, like they were bending against the very laws of physics. Their faces were obscured, but I could feel their eyes on me. The whispering grew louder, now more like a chant. It sounded like a voice, but it wasn't human. It was guttural, like something was forcing words through a throat that shouldn't have been able to speak. I couldn't move. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet were rooted to the floor. Leave this place, the voice rasped. The figures began to move. I could hear their feet scraping against the floor, dragging unnaturally. My vision blurred, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the wall. As I scrambled to escape, I finally found my voice, calling out for my parents. But there was no answer. The house was silent once more. I bolted out of the room and ran up the stairs. I locked myself in my bedroom, not daring to move or make a sound. The next morning, I found my parents in the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened. They seemed strangely unfazed by my panic. I told them what I had seen and heard, but they just looked at each other and exchanged a worried glance. "We know," my father said softly. "It's time for us to leave." I didn't understand at first, but as we packed our things, I felt the heavy presence of something watching us. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that whatever had been in the house, those twisted figures in the shadows, wasn't finished. It had been waiting for us to leave, to take us with it. As we drove away from the ranch, I looked back at the mountains. One last time. I couldn't see the figures, but I knew they were there, waiting in the dark. I wasn't sure if they were skinwalkers or something older, but I didn't care to find out. My family moved away, and I never looked back. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear the whispering again, just at the edge of my hearing. I don't think it's gone. I think it's just waiting for me to return, and when I do, I know it will be there. Waiting in the shadows, ready to call me closer. I was 15 when I spent the summer with my grandfather in the Four Corners region, right near the border of Arizona and New Mexico. My mom sent me there hoping I'd get off my phone and learn some real world values. I thought it'd be all fishing and fire pits. I had no idea what I was stepping into. My grandpa was Navajo, a quiet man, but not unkind, the kind who didn't say much unless it mattered. His house was a single-story place, with wooden beams and old rugs on the walls. No TV, just the wind whistling through the open windows and the occasional crackle of a fire. From the first night, he made one rule very clear: you don't go out after dark, not for anything, not even for the dogs. I laughed. "What if I gotta pee?" "Then you hold it, or use the bucket," he said, dead serious. "There are things out here that don't care about you being young." I didn't ask questions. Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. The nights there were darker than anything I'd ever seen. No street lights, just black sky, stars, and the kind of silence that makes your thoughts feel loud. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, like something was always listening. A week in, I got cocky. My grandpa had gone into town to visit a friend overnight, and I was left with his dogs, Blue and Teo, both mutts, but sharp, loyal animals. That night, the dogs started barking wildly around 2 a.m. They were in their pen out back, and their barking wasn't normal. It was panicked, almost desperate. I peeked out the window. A tall figure stood just beyond the fence line. At first, I thought it was a man, but then it moved, not like a person. Its arms swung too long, and it bent forward at the waist, like it was sniffing the ground. It had what looked like a wolf's face, but the way it stood, it was all wrong. Blue growled, "Teo, whimper, Ed." Then it said my name, clear as day, from a mouth that shouldn't have spoken. "Elias." I jumped back from the window, my breath caught in my throat. It said it again, this time more urgent. "Elias, I'm hurt. Please help." Me, the voice. It was my mom's, but I knew my mom was 3 states away. That thing had no right using her voice. I locked the windows, closed the curtains, and backed away. Then came scratching at the door, soft at first, then faster, then pounding, like fists slamming into the wood. Blue and Teo were barking like mad. Then, suddenly, silence. I waited until morning, huddled in the closet, with my grandpa's old shotgun and a flashlight. I must have passed out because, when I opened my eyes, sunlight was filtering through the curtains. The dogs were back, lying at the foot of the porch, silent but alive. When Grandpa returned, I told him everything. He didn't look surprised. "You heard it speak?" he asked. I nodded. He stared at me a long time, then simply said, "It wanted to be let in." That's what they do. They imitate. They use the voice of someone you trust. If you'd stepped outside, it would have taken your skin. I didn't sleep much the rest of that summer. Grandpa burned cedar every night and left cornmeal at the door. He said prayers I didn't understand. Before I left, he gave me a small pouch to wear around my neck. Blessed, he said. I still wear it, not because I believe it makes me invincible, but because I saw something I cannot explain. People laugh when they hear stories about skinwalkers. They think it's folklore or fantasy, but I know what I heard, and it knew my name. I didn't grow up in a small town. I grew up in a place so remote that when people asked where I was from, I would just say Arizona and leave it at that. Our land was nestled among tall pines with a long driveway and an old, run-down cabin that my father inherited from his grandfather. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and we liked it that way. The isolation was comforting, a place where we could escape the noise of the world. But there was something about those woods, the way they always felt alive, like they were watching. My mom used to say it was the pines. She said they had a presence to them, something ancient. I never paid much attention to her warnings. When you're young, you think you know everything, especially when you spend every summer running wild in the forest, climbing trees, and exploring the old abandoned mine shafts that dotted the landscape. The summer I turned 17, something changed. I was on a solo trip up to the cabin to retrieve a box of old camping gear. It was late in the day, and I was planning on heading back home as soon as I had what I needed. The cabin was a good hour's hike into the woods, and the sun was already starting to dip behind the mountain peaks. I remember walking through the pines, hearing nothing but the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. It was peaceful, but a strange tension hung in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as nerves, or maybe just the quiet of the forest. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I spun around, expecting to see a deer or maybe a stray hiker. But there was nothing, just the dense trees and shadows stretching across the ground. I chalked it up to my imagination and kept walking, faster now, but the footsteps followed. I could hear them clearly, each step matching mine, always just a few paces behind. I called out, thinking maybe it was my dad or someone who had come to check on me, but there was no response. At this point, my heart was pounding in my chest. The footsteps didn't sound like human feet. They were too heavy, too uneven, like someone or something was struggling to walk in a way that wasn't natural. I picked up the pace, practically jogging now, and soon the sounds of the steps faded. I thought I was in the clear, that I had imagined it all. But then I heard it again, a low growl, just behind me. The sound came from deep in the woods, muffled but unmistakable. I froze, feeling my breath catch in my throat. The growl wasn't like any animal I knew. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was something more primal, something older. My instincts screamed at me to turn around and run, but I stayed rooted to the spot, trying to listen for any other sounds. That's when I saw it. In the distance, just beyond the line of trees, a figure stood in the shadows. It was tall, too tall, and its body seemed to shift unnaturally, like it was flickering in and out of existence. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was moving closer. It wasn't walking, it was gliding, its limbs twitching in a way that didn't make sense. The creature's face was hidden in the dark, but I could see its eyes, glowing faintly, like twin coals burning in the night. I turned and ran. The next few minutes felt like a blur. my mind overwhelmed with panic as I sprinted through the dense forest. Branches scratched at my arms and face, but I didn't slow down. The growling continued, closer now, like the creature was closing in, matching my every movement. I could feel it, just behind me, breathing in the air, its presence overwhelming. My legs burned, my chest ached, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The trees blurred around me, and I finally broke through the line of pines into the clearing where the cabin stood. I didn't even look back. I ran straight inside, slamming the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the growls, the footsteps, and the faint rustling of leaves just outside. But there was nothing when I checked the next morning. No signs of anything out of the ordinary. The forest was still, quiet, as if nothing had happened. I never went back to that cabin alone again. My dad always told me stories about the creatures in the woods, the ones that aren't quite human, the ones that wear the skin of animals and walk among us, waiting for the right moment to strike. But I never believed him, not until that night too. This day, I can't shake the memory of those glowing eyes, the way they followed me through the pines, and whenever I'm near that cabin, or even just hiking in the woods, I can feel it again, the eyes watching, waiting for me to wander too, far from the safety of the light. And I know now, deep in my bones, that I'm never truly alone in those woods. I was 16 when my older brother Caleb disappeared. It happened during a weekend hunting trip in northern Arizona, not far from the edge of tribal lands near the Lukachakai Mountains. My dad, Caleb, and two of his friends went up there every fall. It was their tradition, a men's weekend, they called it. They would drink beer, shoot elk, and tell stories around the fire until midnight. But that year, Caleb never came back. I remember the moment Dad walked into the house. He looked pale, like something vital had been drained from him. Mom dropped the laundry basket when she saw his face. The look in his eyes said it all. He didn't even speak, just shook his head slowly. "Caleb's gone," he whispered eventually. "We lost him in the woods." They searched for 5 days. Volunteers, search and rescue, even helicopters. No trace, no signs of struggle, just vanished. One moment Caleb had been following a trail, and the next, he was gone. But this story isn't about how he disappeared, it's about how he came back. 3 years later, it was a rainy Tuesday in October when we heard the knock. Just a single, sharp knock on the door. I opened it and froze. There, standing on the porch in soaking jeans and a flannel shirt, was Caleb. Only, it wasn't. He looked older, worn, gaunt like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His hair was shaggy and dark, not the buzz cut he always kept. And there was something off about his eyes, too wide, too still. "Hey, little bro," he said, voice like Caleb's, but hollow. I didn't know what to do. I screamed for Mom and Dad. They came running and stopped dead in their tracks. "Caleb," Mom whispered. He smiled, but it wasn't right. Too forced, too symmetrical. "Yeah, it's me. We let him in. Of course we did. What else could we do?" The first night, we all just stared at him, asking questions he answered too perfectly. He remembered old stories, inside jokes, birthdays, favorite meals, things only the real Caleb would know. But something in his rhythm was robotic, like it had been rehearsed. That night, I woke up to the sound of humming, a low, tuneless hum echoing from the living room. I crept out of my room, tiptoed down the hall, and found him standing in the dark, staring out the window, humming, still, not blinking. I asked what he was doing. "Just watching," he said, still facing the window. "Watching what?" He paused. "The wind." That was the moment I knew something was wrong. The next few days got worse. Animals avoided our property. Birds vanished from the feeder. Our dog, Duke, who loved Caleb, refused to enter the same room, just growled at him from a distance. Then came the dreams. I started waking up with scratches on my arms. Once, I found muddy footprints in my room. Dad said it was probably mine, but they were bigger than my feet. One morning, Mom made pancakes. Caleb sat at the table, smiling like always. She placed the plate in front of him. He looked down at the food, then up at her, still smiling. "I don't eat this anymore," he said. "It doesn't suit me." "What do you mean?" Mom asked. He stared at her, smile still plastered on. "I prefer meat, raw, if possible." That night, I heard a noise outside, a low, gurgling growl. I peeked through the blinds and saw Caleb in the backyard, crouched near the tree line, eating something. When I told Dad, he finally admitted it. He had doubts too. He said there had been moments during that hunting trip where they'd felt watched, that one of the guides had warned them to stay out of certain areas, said they were sacred, off limits. Places where things walk like men but aren't men. Things the Navajo called Ynaald, Lo Oshiii.Skinwalkers. We decided to confront him. It was just past midnight. Dad, holding his rifle, stepped into Caleb's room. "Where were you these past 3 years?" he asked calmly. Caleb didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, he turned his head. "I was learning." "From who?" Caleb grinned, eyes glinting. "In the dark. From the ones who wait beneath the rock." That was enough. We told him he had to leave. He didn't argue. Just stood up and walked out the front door, barefoot, and vanished into the woods. We thought it was over. But the next night, we woke to find every door and window wide open, and carved into the wooden floor of the hallway was a message, crudely, etched with claw-like marks. "You sent me away, but I never left." We moved a month later, across the country, changed numbers, no forwarding address, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear humming, and sometimes I see a figure in the trees, too tall, too still, watching the wind. One chilly October night, when I was 22, a few friends and I decided to camp out on some land my family owns in northern Arizona. It was remote, nestled deep in a canyon, surrounded by sandstone cliffs and dense pinyon pines. My uncle used to graze sheep there, but for the last few years, the land had been mostly untouched. There were 4 of us: me, my best friend Derek, my cousin Lacey, and her boyfriend Todd. We had all grown up in the area, and though we were familiar with the usual Navajo legends that circulated about the land, none of us took them seriously. Skinwalkers, shapeshifters, witches, just stories, we thought. We arrived at the clearing by early evening, set up our tents, and got a fire going. The air smelled of juniper and dry grass. Everything felt still. Too still, maybe, but we were in good spirits. We roasted hot dogs, drank beer, and told stories, laughing louder than we should have. It was sometime around 11 p.m. when Lacey first noticed it. She went quiet, eyes fixed beyond the firelight. "Is someone out there?" she whispered. We all stopped talking. The night fell silent again. No wind, no insects, no distant howls. Then Todd stood up and pointed toward the ridge that overlooked the camp. "I think someone is watching us." There, barely visible against the moonlight, stood a tall, thin figure. It was too far to make out any details, but it didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still. "Probably a hunter," Derek said, trying to be rational, or a ranger. But what kind of ranger doesn't carry a flashlight, or say anything, or leave, when he's seen? Minutes passed, and the figure still hadn't moved. We decided to ignore it. Maybe if we acted unbothered, it would go away. We doused the fire halfway to cut the light, and climbed into our tents. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those empty eyes, still watching us, listening. At some point around 2 a.m., I heard movement outside. Soft footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I reached for the knife I kept in my boot and held my breath. Something brushed against my tent. A low grunt followed. Then a voice. "Let me in. It's cold." It sounded like Todd, but Todd was inside the tent with Lacey. I didn't answer. I just held still. Then came the sound of sniffing, like an animal trying to catch a scent. I heard something walk toward Derek's tent, followed by a gasp, then scrambling inside. Derek unzipped his tent and bolted out in his socks, yelling, "What the hell was that?" We all rushed out, flashlights in hand. Derek was pale, shaking. "It was me," he said. "It looked just like me, but it was outside the tent." I saw my own face. We packed up and left before sunrise, throwing everything into the truck. None of us spoke. None of us looked back at the ridge. A week later, I went back to retrieve the things we left behind. The tents were still there, slashed open. Our chairs had been broken, and on the ground, written in ash across the dirt, was one word: "Come back." I never returned to that canyon, and to this day, I never camp without checking the tree line, because once you've been seen by one of them, they remember you, and they wait.